At the beginning of the film, we are shown a teenager named Alex who is preparing to go on a school study tour to Paris the next day. Alex leaves for the airport with his best friend, Todd Wagner, and Todd's older brother, George Wagner. The Wagner family and Alex are very close. Even Todd's father told them to look after each other. When Alex is about to put his luggage on the plane, an airport officer notices that his birthday, September 25th, is the same as the plane's departure time, which is 9:25. Before boarding the plane, Todd takes Alex to the toilet because he thinks that going to the toilet on the plane is uncomfortable. While in the toilet, Alex hears a song by John Denver, who he later realizes is a singer who died in a plane crash. This makes him feel uncomfortable and starts to get a bad feeling. When they board the plane, Alex is approached by two women, Krista and Black, who ask to switch seats because Black was previously sitting next to Todd. Alex agrees and moves to Black's seat next to Todd. While on the plane, Alex sees several things that make him even more anxious. The plane they were on seemed poorly maintained. Even the lock on the table in front of their seat suddenly came off. As soon as the plane took off, there was suddenly very strong turbulence. Panic spread in the cabin, the plane began to fall apart, and finally there was a big explosion. However, Alex suddenly woke up. It was just a dream. Strangely, when he woke up, the events he had just experienced in the dream happened exactly the same. Krista and Black asked to switch seats again, and Alex, still feeling uneasy, checked the table lock on his seat. Sure enough, the lock was also loose, just like in the dream. It was not just a dream, but a vision of the future. Alex began to panic and shouted warnings that the plane was going to explode. His classmate Carter was annoyed by Alex's attitude. A commotion ensued on the plane, causing several people to be kicked out. They were Alex, Carter, Carter's girlfriend named Terry, and a woman named Clear. Billy himself had actually just come out of the toilet and was about to return to his seat, but because he was pushed during the commotion, he was also kicked out of the plane. They still didn't believe Alex's words. Meanwhile, Carter still looked upset because he didn't go to Paris and kept blaming Alex. They started fighting again. Shortly afterward, the plane they were supposed to be on suddenly exploded. It turned out that Alex's vision was correct. The survivors looked at Alex with strange and fearful looks. After the incident, the survivors were interrogated by FBI agents named Agent Shrek and Agent Wine. They were asked about the chronology of the incident. Here we learn the reason a woman named Clear got out of the plane because she believed Alex's words. Alex felt depressed and stressed about what happened to him. All night he couldn't sleep and kept watching the news about the plane crash. From the news report, it was known that 287 passengers died. 39 days have passed. Alex's school held a memorial service to commemorate the students and teachers who died in the crash. However, many people still looked at Alex strangely, including Alex's teacher, Mrs. Luton, who didn't even want to talk to him because she was afraid. Todd's father, who was previously close to Alex, told his son to keep his distance from Alex. However, Todd himself still understood Alex's situation and promised to take him on vacation after his father could accept the situation. That night, Alex, who was in his room, kept reading the news about something would happen to Todd. The scene shifts to Todd in the bathroom. Strange things start happening. The water from the toilet leaks and keeps flowing, following Todd wherever he goes. Todd accidentally steps in the water and slips into the bathtub. His neck gets wrapped in a clothesline, and he dies from suffocation. Strangely, after Todd dies, the water that caused and disappears under the bathtub. Meanwhile, Alex, who was worried, immediately went to Todd's house. He was surprised when he saw that the ambulance had arrived there. Todd's father approached Alex and asked, "Didn't you have a vision of Todd?" He then blamed Alex for the plane crash that he thought was the cause of Todd's death. According to him, Todd felt guilty about the death of his brother, George, so he chose to commit suicide. Because the water that caused Todd to slip had disappeared, everyone thought Todd had indeed committed suicide. However, Alex denied it because he was sure Todd would not do that. As a result, Mr. Wagner hated Alex even more. The next day, Alex went to Clear's house and asked why he was at Todd's house last night. Actually, Clear was not close to Alex. Even at school, they rarely greeted each other. However, when the plane crash happened, even though he didn't have a vision like Alex, he could feel something. as if his feelings were connected to Alex's feelings. That was the reason Clear came to Todd's house, because he could feel what Alex was feeling. Alex then realized that Todd's death might be the beginning of a series of deaths for those who survived. That night, they went to the funeral home to see Todd's body. There, they meet an undertaker. Upon viewing Todd's body, Alex finds a wire wound around his neck, which proves that Todd died by accident, not suicide. However, the undertaker denies this. He says that in death, there are no such things as accidents. Everything is part of the plan of death that will lead them to the grave. Alex then asked, "If we can figure out the plan, then we can avoid death, right?" The undertaker replied that by getting out of the plane, Alex had avoided death. However, with Todd's death, it meant that death had a new plan for the survivors. According to the undertaker, they should have died in the plane crash. Now, Alex had to figure out how and when his turn would come. The next day, Alex and Clear sat in a cafe, discussing the death plan that the undertaker had mentioned. Carter and his girlfriend Terry happened to see Alex and approached him. At that time, Mrs. Luton and Billy were also there. Carter and Alex argued again, making Terry angry. He was upset because every time they met, there was always an argument. Terry decided to leave, but suddenly he was hit by a bus and died instantly. He noticed that the sparks inside the plane followed a certain path. The path of the explosion turned out to be from Todd's seat. Now Todd was dead. Next there was Terry, who had just been killed by a bus. Then the path of the explosion led to Mrs. Luton's. Luton saw Alex standing in front of her house from the window. Because she was afraid, she immediately contacted the FBI. Meanwhile, Alex checked Mrs. Luton's car, looking for the cause that would kill her. Not long after, the FBI came and took Alex for questioning. Alex explained that he was sure the next victim was Mrs. Luton and revealed the death design pattern that he had found. The FBI initially suspects Alex of causing the plane crash, but they start to reconsider after seeing that the survivors of the crash are dying one by one. Alex says, "As long as I'm in this police station, I can't stop Mrs. Luton from dying." Eventually, the FBI lets Alex go. However, at her house, Mrs. Luton begins to experience strange things. Water from her glass leaks into her computer, causing an explosion that impales her neck. Sparks from the computer ignite her alcohol. As she grabs a cloth to stop the bleeding, a knife falls out and stabs her in the chest. Alex arrives too late to find Mrs. Luton covered in blood. As he pulls the knife out of her body, Alex realizes that his fingerprints are now on the knife. And coincidentally, Billy sees him leaving Mrs. Luton's house. The next day, Alex is a fugitive. The FBI, together with Carter and Billy, he searches for Alex because only Alex knows who the next victim will be. They eventually find him on the beach. Clear takes Alex to his father's cabin to hide because Alex cannot go home after being accused of Mrs. Luton's murder. Carter grows increasingly frustrated with Alex's silence. With his emotions running high, he says that there's no point in trying to avoid something that's bound to happen. Carter, who was upset with this situation, began to challenge death. He drove the car at high speed. Alex had another premonition. He saw the shadow of a train in the car window, and his seatbelt felt suspicious. Clear and Billy, who were in the car, panicked and asked Carter to stop, but Carter even stopped in the middle of the train tracks. They all got out of the car except Carter, who was still stubborn. Alex and the others tried to persuade him to get out, but Carter was sure that it was not his turn to die. When he tried to start his car, the engine died. Panic began to hit. Carter tried to open the door, but it was locked. He also tried to unbuckle his seatbelt, but it felt stuck. Alex did not stay silent. He tried to pull Carter out, and finally, at the last second before the train hit the car, Carter's seatbelt came off, and Alex managed to pull him out. Billy was angry and scared because it turned out that Carter was supposed to die, but managed to survive. Billy said he didn't want to be near Carter because death would definitely find a replacement. However, before Billy could continue his words, suddenly a piece of iron from the car that was hit by the train flew towards him and immediately split his head open. Alex realized that because he saved Carter, death's turn jumped to Billy. That means death can be avoided if they save each other. They can cheat death. Alex said the next turn is him, and the last one means clear. Alex prepared to face his death. He closed all the things that could harm him. Even when eating, he was very careful. Then the sign appeared with the arrival of a strong wind. But Alex managed to avoid his death. Alex realized when he was on the plane, he didn't switch seats with Blake, and Clear's seat was right in front of him. This means he survived not because he managed to avoid death, but because it was not Alex's turn, but now it was Clear's turn. Alex rushed to Clear's house while avoiding the police chase, while Clear was at his house trying to avoid death. Clear got into the car to take shelter. Alex, who had arrived, immediately helped Clear. Alex asked Clear not to touch anything because electricity had struck the car. Alex intended to sacrifice himself. Alex held the electric cable, and an explosion occurred so that Alex was thrown. Clear's death was finally avoided. 6 months later, Alex, Carter, and Clear go on vacation to Paris. They feel relieved because they believe they have managed to escape the fate of death that has been targeting them. On the trip, Carter seems friendlier and no longer emotional when talking to Alex. However, the atmosphere suddenly changes when Alex returns to discussing the pattern of death they have experienced. Alex began to feel confused. After he managed to save Clear, it should have been his turn. He was thrown by the electric explosion in the car, but no one saved him. Strangely, he was still alive. This made him think that maybe he hadn't really escaped the fate of death. Suddenly, Alex had a bad feeling again. He felt that now was his turn. Without saying much, Alex immediately went to the hotel and asked his friends not to follow him. Suddenly, a bus almost hit Alex. Clear shouted to warn Alex so he could avoid it. Suddenly, a giant billboard fell towards Alex. However, Carter acted quickly so that Alex could avoid death. And Carter asked Alex, "So, who's next?" The film ended. Okay, here I will explain a little. Maybe you are wondering, why did Carter die even though his turn had passed when he was saved by Alex on the train tracks? So this is it. Alex is the last person in the order of death. Meanwhile, there are still 3 survivors: Carter, Clear, and Alex himself. It turns out that if the last person on the death list, in this case Alex, manages to survive and avoid death, then the cycle will repeat itself with the previous person, Carter. If Carter survives, then it will be Clear's turn to die. If Clear also survives, then it will be back to Alex. And if Alex escapes again, the turn will repeat itself with Carter, and it will continue until they are all dead. So, Alex can't really beat or avoid death unless someone keeps saving him. That's the